So as you can see, many things are popping up, but we have different levels. We have the interpersonal, the family, the ownership, the business, and the family business levels when we think about emotions. And as I said, we're going to try to go step by step over it. So let's start with what you see in the red quadrant. The impact of emotion contagion, because emotions can be contagious. They start at the interpersonal level. They can, spread among different family members, and they can impact behavior. And this behavior will have some consequences when it comes to continuity. So let's focus on this very first and basic part to start with. I will use 2 mini cases that I will be sharing with you. I will be reading them, and then I will be asking some questions in the polls, asking you to reflect on those mini cases. So let's get ready to start with the first mini case. So these are, those 2 mini cases are real examples. So I will not be disclosing the names of the businesses at first hand, so we can reflect all together about them. But afterwards, I'll tell you which family business I was referring to, because these are known to the public eye. So in this first mini case, we have John. John is a next generation member and chair of the family council of one of the wealthiest families in the country of origin. The family is an industrial dynasty with big stakes in various international brands. His father, now retired, still actively uses his wide network to bring opportunities to the family enterprise. As part of his family governance role, John commissioned a historian to write the company's history. After allowing a few months of investigation, he had a meeting with him to discuss the state of progress. It is then that the historian shared long hidden information. Looking into the detailed company's archives, he uncovered facts dating back to 70 years about the family's behavior during World War II. It has emerged that John's father and grandfather were enthusiastic Nazis, and the family frequently used slave labor, and they employed female slaves, treating them as racially inferior. And many of them were worked to the point of exhaustion and death on the company's premises. So again, this is inspired by a real case, and I would like you to reflect with the following questions. Which emotions would the next generation feel? So putting yourselves in the shoes of John or the next generation members of that family business. Please just write down, and we will have a word cloud appearing, the emotions that you think the next generation would feel. Okay, so we can see shame, guilt, disappointment, embarrassment, anger, sadness, discomfort. frustration. So negative emotions mainly that the next generation would feel. Thank you for answering this first all. Fear, there is also fear appearing. Again, another negative emotion. So following the appraisal, to go back to this emotion process that I mentioned before, following the appraisal of the history, the next generation is able to feel emotions, right? When the next generation was not aware about what happened in the history, those emotions were not there yet. So what are the triggers of such emotions? According to you, if you had to use one word. Fear. Insecurity, anxiety. Facts. The lie, the distrust. Confusion. So, yeah, very interesting answers. The knowledge. So we can see, looking at the word cloud that is appearing, that there is also a mix of emotions. So some emotions can drive other emotions too. Being aware of certain emotions can drive other emotions. So this is also part of the process. And indeed, we have the facts which appear most frequently. We have the insecurity also around those facts. And it's a really unhealthy situation that is taking place. But as you mentioned, there are many negative emotions out there. So let's now move on and think it through. I'll focus on one of the emotions that you mentioned, which is guilt. You have mentioned mainly shame, guilt, embarrassment, disappointment. Shame is usually an emotion that we feel when we do something that we consider as a wrongdoing, and we try to stay away from the public eye to be able to deal with the shame. The guilt is a little different in that perspective. For me to explain it a little bit better, I'll ask you to answer two quick questions. First, think of a non-family organization in which you currently work or used to work with. Would you feel guilty for ethical misbehavior of your predecessor at work? A few more seconds. It seems like 100%, but some of you would feel. Okay, so 80%, more or less, among you will not feel guilty for this ethical misbehavior of your predecessor at work. The majority, at least. Seventy percent more or less. Okay, so now let's think about the same question, but let's consider that it's about a past ethical misbehavior of a family member, and then you're focusing on the family business now. So think about the family business. Would you feel guilty for past ethical misbehavior of a family member? So the tendency is reversed as compared to the previous question. So we have a majority of yes here. Indeed, when it comes to family members, we tend to feel more guilty, and that's what makes the family business, again, so different from other organizations. So when we think about guilt, actually, guilt occurs as a result of the cognitive appraisal process that occurs when there's a difference, there's a gap between how I should have behaved and how I actually behaved. But in a family business, it's mainly how other family members should have behaved as compared to how they have, actually behaved. So this interlinkage between emotions that next generation members can feel regarding wrongdoings by past generation members is very unique to family businesses. And that's what shows that emotions can be transgenerational. We can feel emotions for things that happened in the past. And this will impact decisions, obviously, that we will make in the future. So let's see what you think about the level of responsibility of the next generation. So going back to the first case that I disclosed, to what extent, if you were the next generation, would you feel responsible for what your father and grandfather has done during World War II with the slavery and all the other scandalous discoveries that the historian told you about? So far, okay. So we can see that there is rather a feeling of responsibility as next generation members, although the next generation members were not involved in that past wrongdoing. So 40% of you, more or less, very responsible. And almost the same feel that they are moderately responsible, 25% as not responsible. And actually, this variety is very normal, and it's actually due to the level of identification that the next generation members have towards the family. And that's what research shows, and that's what I will show you at the next slide. So actually, the level of identification of the next generation members with the family will determine the level of guilt that the family members will feel for the past or present wrongdoings. And unlike what could be expected, actually, the less the family members are identified with the family, the more their level of guilt. In other words, the family members are able to distance themselves from what happened, to have an appraisal of the situation, which is as objective as possible, and then to feel those emotions accordingly. And the more identified the family members, the less they will feel guilty, being less able to distance themselves and to do a proper appraisal of the situation. So what is interesting to keep in mind here is that the level of responsibility and the level of emotions that family members might feel is not straightforward. It will depend with how much identified the family members are with the business. That's based on research that was done on a Western sample of next generation members. So now let's think about the actions, because as you know, when we think about emotion as a process, there is the intensity of emotions and there is the behavior and the action that come out of it. So what actions would you take? And perhaps you can think about it in terms of priority as well. Would you do private apologies to the victims, provide financial compensation, change or improve existing processes? Would you publicly communicate about the wrongdoing? Or would you resign from the family business role? Or would you do nothing? Okay, so we have private apologies in the first position, changing, improving existing processes, follow public communication, then financial compensation, resigning, and none. Few of you have picked the none option. Just leave a little bit more time for others to answer. Okay, so some would change, improve. Yeah, it's changing all the time. So I'll wait a little bit before sharing the results. Okay, so there is this change and improvement in existing processes, which is in the first position. Yeah, changing all the time. First, second position. Let's say the three main ones is around changing the processes, apologizing, and providing financial compensation. Resigning from the family business role comes really as a last resort in terms of priorities. So let me share with you what research shows following such situations and what is the family business that I was talking about and what did the family members do following the facts that they have uncovered. So there are many responsible behaviors that the next generation members commit to make following this emotion of guilt, doing restorative or reparative actions, apologizing and changing business practices indeed. So very in line with your answers. And going back to the family business that I mentioned, I guess those different international brands are familiar with you. Krispy Kreme, Panera Bread, or even Pret-à-Manger. They are all part of the GAB holdings controlled by the Reimann family in Germany. And what the family basically did is communicate the facts openly to the public, and decided to donate a certain amount of money to be able to compensate what happened in the past, and also committed to disclose in details all the facts, to be as transparent as possible. So in a way, those feelings of guilt following the discovery of certain wrongdoings in the past might push the next generation to feel guilty and accordingly to engage in positive behaviors. So the takeaway from this case is mainly the fact that although guilt can be a negative emotion, it can lead to constructive actions. So negative emotions can really have positive impact in certain instances. So let's keep this in mind. It's possible to leverage negative emotions in the family business to be able to move on and to ensure continuity. We have many other examples. I won't be long around this, but we have the Merck pharmaceutical family business, again in Germany, which has also employed forced labor during the World War II, producing chemicals that were useful for the Nazis. So the family also apologized, decided to pay financial compensation, and it also erected the statues to be able to officially show its guilt following what happened. So family businesses can do something about guilt and move on. And in the case of Merck, just very quickly, this happened 2 generations after the facts. So again, what is interesting here is to see that the next generation can really feel guilty after more than 1 generation. And we can also see other extreme examples, like, for example, the son of Bernard Madoff, which committed suicide, and in his letter, he claims that he felt guilty for what his father has done. So depending again on the level of identification of family members with other family members or with the family, we can have actions which can be triggered following emotions. So now let's look into the second mini case altogether, and I will read it out loud again, and I will ask you to reflect on it and then share with you which family business is it. So growing up, Carrie's family name was synonymous with a well-known traditional beverage in her country of origin. As the granddaughter of the founder, Carrie was immersed in the family business since her early age. After graduating from college, she started working in the family business. The business kept on growing with major expansions in various industries such as hospitality and luxury. The family was also growing with 7 branches representing 40 family shareholders who were not all active in the business. They all signed an agreement binding them to maintain their shares in the family's hands. At the last shareholders' assembly, Carrie learned that the family received an appealing financial offer from an investment fund interested in buying the family business. As the shareholders' agreement was about to expire, the majority of the shareholders expressed their interest in selling the shares. Only 2 other minority shareholders shared her concern about the disconnect between the long-term vision of the traditional beverage business, holding the family name, and the short-term side of the investment fund. Should you be the next generation, which emotions would you feel? So you have a family shareholders agreement about to expire. Most of the family members ready to sell. You have grown in the business. You seem to be emotionally attached to the business. The business holds the family name. and the buyer is more short-term oriented, whereas the beverage business is more long-term oriented. Confusion, disappointment, disengagement. Sadness. I can see enthusiasm for some. Frustration, melancholy, disillusion. So again, we can see mainly negative emotions popping up. Yeah, absolutely. So negative emotions popping up. So to what extent would you feel responsible in this case for the sale of the business to this investment fund? Although you are a minority shareholder. So again, we can see a disparity in the answers. And just like we have seen it in the case of the guild, it will depend on the level of the identification that the next generation members have towards the family business. Okay, so the more you are identified to the family business, the more you are prone to feeling certain types of emotions. So now let's reflect on the outcomes. What actions would you take in relation to the family business? Once the business is sold, because you're not a majority shareholder, what would you do? Would you invest the proceedings of the sale in another business? Would you work on a plan to buy back the business? Or would you do nothing special about it? Okay, so first invest in another business, work on a plan to buy back, and no actions. Yeah, this is like the third option. So let's see what happened and what emotion was really at the heart of this family business case. So actually, it was another negative emotion. It was regret. Regret, this time following the sale. So this, again, based on research, invites us to think about the role that some emotions might play in certain decisions, key decisions for continuity, such as divestment decisions, and the implications that such a decision can have in terms of emotional and financial value. what is the real emotional and financial value that some family members derive following the divestment decision, and whether they're not finding this financial value or emotional value they're expecting, they would engage in certain actions. So previously we had a poll regarding Lacoste, the Wall Street Journal, for example, which were sold by the founding family. But we have also other examples. And the example I had in mind mainly, it was Champagne Tétanger. So that was the beverage business that I was mentioning. And the example was about a girl, but actually it was a next generation member that you can see here on the picture. Yeah, Emmanuel Tétanger. And usually, I mean, even if you look at the Wall Street Journal, the Bancroft family members, some of them also expressed regret following the sale. So when some family members are highly identified with a family business, with a long-term orientation, they tend to feel regret following the sale. But each family business is different, right? So there are possibilities that those family members buy back the business, which was the case of the Champagne Tétanger, where Pierre-Emmanuel actually decided to buy back the business with the support of funds created by other families who understood his cause. And he managed actually to buy it back at a much higher price than the original price to which the business was sold, only 6 months later. And as one of the supporters of this buyback mentioned, when the young Tétanger called me, I immediately said yes, because a business that loses its name loses its soul. So this shows that following emotions of regret, which stem again from a high level of identification, family members can use this negative emotion and do some constructive action. So today the business has been passed on to the next generation, so he's no longer in charge, which means that the business managed to continue with this long-term perspective. Regarding the Wall Street Journal, even the Lacoste, some of the family members engaged in the case of the Wall Street Journal to set up a family office with multiple activities supporting family members on different levels, governance, education, and so on, and other families to learn the lessons in a way from what happened. And in the case of Lacoste, some family members indeed went and bought back other businesses and also continued the philanthropic activities of the families, the original founding family. So there is life after sale, but again, there is need to express those emotions, to consider them, to be able to move on accordingly. Because not all families are alike. Happy ones could be, but unhappy ones, that seem a little bit complicated. So let's now move to the second part around the double inquiry with some practical guidelines for managing and governing emotions. And you can see that I'm separating here the emotion management process from the governance process of emotion. And this is very important. Keeping again in mind, just as a reminder, that family businesses can operate differently depending on their emotional archetype, depending on the level of interaction between the family and the business on the emotional side. So looking back at my framework, the framework that I showed you before, let's move a little bit to the emotion management strategies part. So once we have those emotions impacting behavior, continuity of the family business, we can also do something about them to be able to improve the processes and improve the outcome. Without going into details, there are two major emotion management strategies that were identified by social psychologists: the antecedent focused and the response focused. So basically, the idea is to say that emotion regulation can occur at different stages of the emotion process. So either we can have an impact on the situation, on the action, or on the appraisal, on the emotion response directly, or the behavior. And this could be kind of a vicious circle. So in a way, we can reappraise the situation with different lenses, and this will lead to another emotional response. So this will help us manage those emotions, change the type of emotion that we feel or the intensity of emotion, and accordingly the behavior. So when we think about emotion management, we think about, among other possibilities, the emotion regulation process, which, as I mentioned before, could be antecedent focused, which means that we will look at the situation which led to the appraisal and the emotional response, and then the behavior, or response focused, and there we will immediately tackle the response itself, and we will work on improving our level of emotion or changing our emotion accordingly. Now, this emotion management process can happen on an explicit-implicit continuum, which means it could be implicit. We don't need to do monitoring of those emotions. We don't need really to raise insights or awareness around it. And it could be explicit, which means it will be done explicitly to monitor those emotions and to increase awareness. And again, it could be done on the interpersonal level, which can also lead to contagion at the group level. So focusing on the explicit level, what can we say? Interestingly, we can see already that from 2 decades ago, a little bit more than 2 decades ago, actually, in the organizational behavior field, we saw a stream of thought developing around the fact that emotions really matter in organizations, and that we need to also trigger emotion as part of the work role. So in organizations, we should not only think about them rationally, we should also trigger some emotions in the employees, in the workplace. Because the research has shown that it leads to reduced intention to turnover when we have positive emotions, more pro-social behavior, more cooperative negotiations, better financial performance, better cognitive functioning, problem solving, and so on, increased creativity, more entrepreneurial ideas. So lots of positive outcomes when the researchers looked at the role of positive emotions in the workplace. So they come up with the idea of emotional labor, which is a feature that was originally developed in the service industry, smile factory, as one man would call it, looking at Disneyland, for instance. And the idea was, let's trigger positive emotions in employees, because this will lead to more performance, more satisfaction with the clients, and so on and so forth. However, the emotional labor is an emotional work, and the employees, for different reasons, might not always feel like smiling, feel happy, and triggering or expressing emotions that they do not feel might lead to burnout, to emotional burnout. So the idea, basically, following this stream of thought, is to say that positive emotions are important in the workplace, but it's also all in the way the organization will trigger and create some norms for the employees to feel certain types of emotions that might be in contradiction with other emotions that they are feeling at that specific moment. But still, this has triggered this emotional management thought in the workplace. And the idea was to say, okay, we need to work on the antecedents. We need to work on the situational cues to activate certain goals, to trigger certain emotion events, which will lead to the choice of certain emotion management strategies to make sure that those positive emotions are displayed in the workplace. So now, translating this thinking into the family business, what can this tell us basically? It tells us that looking into family business, changing emotions or picking some strategies for emotion management cannot be done, on a very specific regulation perspective. It should be also done by taking into account holistically the organization and in a chronological order. Because emotions that the family members will feel now or in the future are actually very much linked with the past of the organization, as we have seen in the case of guilt and the case of regret. So in the family business, family members need to know where they come from to decide where to go and how to get there. So they really need to get a grasp of what happened in the past, to understand the emotional patterns of the family members in the past. And this understanding will help the family choose the right emotion management strategies and the right emotions to display towards continuity. So there is this specific way of thinking, which is different from family business when it comes to setting up emotion management strategies that the organizational members would be requested to follow. And this leads us to the final part of our framework, which is emotion governance mechanisms. Actually, emotion governance mechanisms, as you can see here on the figure, can be of different types and on different levels. It could be sociocultural norms, informal, that are rooted in the society where the family, comes from. It could be organizational trust, psychological safety. It could be the mutual trust of family members, family reunion, family norms. So these different informal mechanisms actually will motivate the emotion management strategies that the family members should follow, and also will help monitor the way family members are following those strategies towards continuity. And those emotion governance mechanisms can be also formal. For example, we can have business governance structures, agreements, organizational norms that are written, family governance structures and agreements that are formal. And this will also provide a framework for the family members to pick their strategies to manage emotions, and also which emotions they should be expressing and which behavior should this lead to accordingly. And those emotion governance mechanisms, those different ones, have nuances across family businesses. So whether the family business is balanced, is disengaged, or enmeshed, we can, look at different levels of informal emotion governance and of formal emotion governance. So depending on where your family business would stand, and I asked you this question before, you might want to look at the right dose of formality when it comes to emotion governance to make sure that you are working with your family to be able to move towards the balanced family business side. So in other words, to wrap it up, it's important for family members to also set up some governance mechanisms, or to be aware of the importance of some informal governance mechanisms that can monitor and play out when it comes to emotion management. And this will lead to the right behavior and the right continuity. So let me just ask you to reflect on your own case briefly. Which informal mechanisms helped you in the emotion governance, although you might not be really aware about its impact? But when you think about sociocultural norms, organization trust, family reunion, family norms. How do you govern your emotions? How do you monitor the way the family members express their emotions, control their emotions, so that it leads to the right behavior? Yeah, we can see the importance of the family mutual trust, the family norms, family emotion norms, the sociocultural norms. They're actually all embedded in one another. So, but some could be more important than others. So yes, so I invite you really to be aware of the importance of those different informal mechanisms and the way they actually drive the emotion management strategies of your family, and perhaps to discuss them also, and to reinvent them, to adapt them if needed, so that you have the right behavior that fits the right archetype of the family business. Okay, great. So now let's move to the second question around the formal mechanisms that you think have helped you in the emotion governance. So the corporate governance boards, other committees, the shareholders or ownership agreements, the organization norms, you have the family governance committees or the family charter, constitution, or other written agreements. Okay, so we can see that, it's a mix between organizational norms and family formalization of norms in terms of charter, constitution, written agreements. So again, all these mechanisms are not only helpful, to set up some frameworks for functioning in the business from a rational perspective, but also for emotions per se. So again, I invite you also to be aware of the importance of those formal mechanisms for your emotion governance, and to discuss the emotion, dimension openly, accordingly. So let me wrap it up almost here. So I really invite you to think about management and governance of emotions in the family business separately. These are not the same thing. So let's think about governance of emotions. And the emotion governance actually will influence the emotion management strategies of family members, as I explained briefly previously. It also depends, the level of formal emotion governance and the level of informal emotion governance will depend on the archetype of your family business, whether you are disengaged, balanced, or enmeshed, and you can work on the dose of formal and informal emotion governance to also help your family business move towards the balanced archetype. And afterwards, you have the influence of the emotion management strategies with the family business behavior in relation with continuity. So it's like a circle. You consolidate the emotion governance to have the right strategies for emotion management, the right behavior, and continuity. So just keep in mind two little things. Emotion governance is dynamic, so it changes over time. Keep in mind that you would need to adapt the informal and formal governance mechanisms accordingly, and that you need a leader also for emotion governance. The leader is not only about management, it's also about the emotion governance, and to think about developing the skills for your leader to motivate the family business members around aligning their emotion management. Concluding remarks. Emotion governance is really an overarching multidimensional mechanism that will help you at different stages of the emotion management process, ex ante, before, during, and ex post. It will help you motivate, support, and monitor the family members to be aligned around the emotion management strategies, and therefore to contribute to ensure the accountability in meeting the financial and the socio-emotional goals for the family business continuity. So I think I will stop here. I'd just like you to reflect on perhaps one or two key takeaways that you will practically use. Maybe just reflect on that, write them down. You can write them down and share them with us. And you can also ask questions